Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday to you. My name is Tim Harris. It's 10 o'clock, and that means it's time for 10 with Tim. We have just started a brand new study, verse by verse, through the book of Galatians, Paul's letter to the church in the province of Galatia. And like I say, we're just starting this. This is day number 2 of this study. We're in chapter 1, verses 11 to 24. So we're really just getting into it. So if you're new, jump in, follow us through the book of Galatians. This is going to be fun. I love this. Now, as we said yesterday, Paul is actually addressing critics, those who have come behind him after he has preached the gospel in the church of Galatia. And now they've begun to question everything and causing the church members, the believers there, to begin questioning everything as well. And so Paul understands that everything is at stake here because salvation is at stake. I mean, the question we're dealing with here is, how is a person saved? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? And Paul has preached the gospel of Jesus. But now the Judaizers, that's what they're called, the Judaizers have come behind him and are trying to cause the church, the believers, to question the gospel, or at least the version of the gospel that Paul has preached. And so Paul now is going to have to defend himself and his gospel. And this is where we start in chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. If you ever wrote an important paper in college or in high school, you had a thesis statement, right? And your thesis statement is the big statement that just sort of comes out and said what you're going to continue to say in the paragraphs that follow. So if there's a thesis statement in the book of Galatians or for Paul's letter here, it's in verses 11 and 12. And this is what he says. I want you to understand that the gospel message I preach is not based on mere human reasoning. Now remember, back in verse 1, he said, I was not appointed by any group of people or any human authority. I mean, that's what he says right out of the gate. So this matters to Paul, which is to say, this must be one of the ways in which they're attacking him. They must be saying Paul's gospel is secondhand. He got this from people, which means he's not a real apostle. Now, okay, that's a little bit funny to me because none of the Judaizers, none of his critics, they're not apostles either. But they're just simply trying to say Paul doesn't have the authority that he claims to have when he preaches the gospel. He got it secondhand from the 12, from the apostles in Jerusalem. So this is Paul's thesis. I want you to understand the gospel message I preach is not based on mere human reasoning. I received my message from no human source. Again, verse 12. And no one taught me. Instead, I received it by direct revelation from Jesus Christ. All right? Thesis statement. The gospel that I preach, it comes straight from Jesus. It does not come from people. No people. Right? So understand that. That's very important. Because in order to be considered an apostle, one of the original apostles, you had to have direct revelation. You had to be a recipient of a direct, appearance of the resurrected Jesus. It couldn't be secondhand. Now, you and I, we've all received the gospel, from secondhand preaching. But the apostle, to have apostolic authority in the early church, you had to be a witness, to the risen Christ. You had to have a direct revelation. And Paul's saying, I got that. And so from here, Paul begins to talk about sort of his testimony, his history. And it's very important. And I think it's just beautiful. So he starts out, you know what I was like. And I love this. I love this because Paul's about to establish where his authority comes from, right? And he says, you know what I was like. I followed the Jewish religion. How violently I persecuted the church. I did my best to destroy it. I was far ahead of all my fellow Jews in terms of zeal for the traditions of my ancestors. All right. Now, Paul's just trying to say, I did not begin as a person who had any sort of, inclination to stray away from the Jewish law. In zeal, I was far ahead of any other Jew. You name a Jew, and I was more Jewish than any of them. I was to the point of trying to destroy the very church I'm building now. All right, now understand, just see what Paul's saying there. Because what it is about his gospel that they find offensive is the fact that it's law-free. Paul preaches a law-free gospel to the Gentiles. And so the Judaizers realize they're Christians, but they're Jewish Christians. And they sort of believe, and I know sort of to it, they believe that the only way for anybody to become a Christian is also to become a Jew first. You have to accept the law of Judaism and then add to that the gospel of Jesus, and that's how you get saved. Paul says, no, it's Jesus plus nothing. And we're going to talk about that over and over and over in the days to come. But understand, Paul's saying, y'all know where I come from. I was a Jew of Jews. And I absolutely had all this zeal toward the traditions of my ancestors. Verse 15, but even before I was born, God chose me, called me, because of his marvelous grace, and it pleased him to reveal his son to me. Now, actually right there, verse 16, that's one of the kind of questions, for those who read the Bible very faithfully. It's like, some translations will say he revealed his son to me, but actually the Greek sort of says he revealed his son in me. Now, some people they would say Paul must mean, he revealed his son to me, because that's like the Damascus Road. That's where Paul's saying, I am a witness. I have seen the risen Christ. He appeared to me on the road to Damascus. God revealed his son to me. And that's where my authority comes from. But, I really do think Paul means what he says. He revealed his son in me. Now, that doesn't take anything away from the fact that Paul is a witness, an eyewitness to the risen Christ. It blinded him on the road to Damascus. But this comes back to what Paul says, all throughout his preaching. That I have been crucified with Christ, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. It's this idea that it's not just he appeared to me once, that God is revealing his son in me. I think it's important because he goes on to say, so that I would preach him. Preach him. I mean, the content of Paul's preaching is Christ himself. So when he goes on, this is what he says. I'm proclaiming Christ. I proclaim him to the Gentiles. You see, so this is sort of the way in which they're attacking his gospel. You got it secondhand, and then it's been polluted because you've tried to make it more appealing to the Gentiles. So you've sort of, washed all the Jewishness out of it. And now Paul's preaching this secondhand gospel that's been somehow adapted, to be pleasing to the Gentiles, So Paul goes on. When all this happened, I did not rush out to consult with any human being. Okay, Paul makes it really clear. I did not go to Jerusalem, to let them tell me what just happened to me. I didn't go to Jerusalem to let them teach me the gospel. As a matter of fact, he says, I was gone. I didn't go to any of those apostles. He said, I went to Arabia, And later I returned to the city of Damascus. And 3 years later, I made my first post-conversion visit to Jerusalem. Okay, now, this is interesting for several reasons. First off, you got to realize, for Paul, after his conversion, for Saul, after his conversion, Jerusalem's not going to be a safe place for him. Remember, he had papers from the high priest, to go arrest and drag back, the followers of Jesus. I mean, that was Paul's commission. And he failed in his commission. Not only did he fail, he joined the church. He joined them. And so Saul can't just come parading back to Jerusalem. The Jews are going to hate him. The high priests are going to despise him. He's turned against them. He's become one of the enemy. So there's a good reason for Paul to stay away from Jerusalem for a good long time. And Paul says 3 years was just about enough. And that's the first time I came back. And when I came back, I came to get acquainted with Peter. Notice he says, I'm getting acquainted. He doesn't say I came to have him teach me. I was coming back, to seminary. No, I just came to establish fellowship with Peter. The only other apostle I saw at the time was James. Now, I declare before God, well, I'm telling you, it's not a lie. Understand how important this is to Paul. I mean, again, this is his defense. It's a full-throated defense of his apostleship because he wants to understand, I got this from Jesus. I wasn't tutored. I wasn't, in any way schooled by the other apostles. What I preach, I got from Jesus. God revealed Jesus in me, and then I went out and started preaching Jesus. You know, so good, so beautiful, so important. So then I'll jump to the end. And so all they knew was that people were saying the one who used to persecute us is now preaching the very faith he tried to destroy. You know, so he's saying, 3 years in Arabia, 15 days with Peter, and then I went out preaching, and then the only thing they knew about me was the one who used to, used to persecute us is now preaching the very faith. So I love that. Remember how we started. You know what I was like, and then ends up in this passage, with people saying, my goodness, look what a change in him. So don't miss that. As Paul is emphasizing his worthiness, his credentials, the integrity of his apostleship, there's just one thing nobody can argue with, and that is the power of his changed life. It's the power of his changed life, and only Jesus could do that. God, before I was born, Paul says, God chose to reveal his son in me. And I've gone out ever since that moment preaching nothing but him, just preaching Jesus. Oh, it's so good. I just want to go forever, but I'm stopping because we get to come back tomorrow. We'll pick up right there tomorrow, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Chapter 2, Galatians, verses 1 through 10 for tomorrow. So read ahead. Y'all, I love this. I'm not going to say it's my favorite because so far I think I've told y'all every verse in the Bible was my favorite, and y'all are going to think I'm crazy. But I love this. I love being in this with you. So dig in with me. So different from what we've been doing in the book of Daniel, but we're in the gospel now. We're in the book of Galatians, and I love it. So read ahead for tomorrow, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, and I will see you in the morning.